Now, Sami Hamdi is the editor-in-chief of International Interest, an online news service. Joins us now from the British capital, London. Good to have you with us. So, the evacuation of the white helmets, is it part of a new understanding, a broader understanding between the US and Russia?
I think it's a bit deeper than that. I think we have to remember first and foremost that the white helmets are the main key witnesses to some of the atrocities that we've seen during this particular war. If we want to tell the story of war or the narrative of war or talk about the bringing people to justice after this conflict comes to an end, the white helmets are going to be fundamental with regards to this part. I say this because it's difficult to frame it in the Russia-US agreement, because Russia and the Assad regime in particular, they resent the white helmets with a particular venom, mainly because they have been a key instrumental part in the PR campaign against the Assad regime and against Russia in bringing to light some of the atrocities that have happened in this war. We've heard stories in the past of assassination attempts on white helmets, on targeted bombings against places where you find volunteers from the white helmets. So I think with regards to the evacuation, it may well be that this is outside a US-Russia rapprochement, and perhaps more of keeping a wild card in the event that Syria becomes, and it looks on course to become, a more Russian allied state than a US allied state. I would think that the Assad regime in particular would not particularly be happy with the white helmets being evacuated. I think with regards to the excuse that they were being surrounded, they were being blockaded by the Assad forces on one side and ISIS forces on the other side, this situation has happened before, and we haven't seen an evacuation of this scale before. So it's a bit difficult to ascertain why exactly these white helmets in particular were being evacuated. I think personally this is part of a broad division, simply just to keep a wild card in particular, should the Western governments decide at some point to pursue some sort of punitive measures against the Assad regime in future.
Well, that was going to be precisely my next point, so nicely transitioned there. Does it open up more of a possibility for perhaps legal action against the Assad regime?
I think legal action, but when we say legal action, it shouldn't be said with the hope that something serious or something punitive will actually happen to the Assad regime. If we look at the realpolitik, the situation on the ground as it is, Assad has restored almost 90% of his territory in the south. The revolutionary forces are now in retreat. They are all being gathered up in Idlib, and all that is left in Syria is for the Assad regime, for the Russians to launch one final attack on Idlib in order to break the back of the Syrian revolution, which is a tragedy in my particular opinion. However, with regards to pursuing legal action, these white helmets will be integral in telling the story. In other words, it will prevent Assad from telling a story that he was victorious against terrorist organizations. The white helmets will be integral in telling the tragedy of a story of a people who wanted freedom and justice, but were suppressed and quelled by a vicious and tyrannical regime backed by Russia, backed by Iran, backed by these various different powers.
Sami Hamdi, stay with us because we've got more to chat about when it comes to Syria, but this is one aspect which we need to also touch upon, and the reports that Russian military police have had to step in to let Syrian rebels resume their journey to the country's north. Now, militias loyal to Iran apparently blocked this convoy of buses near the city of Homs for more than 7 hours. They were eventually allowed to go through after the Russian intervention. The rebels and their families were being taken from Quneitra to Idlib province in the north. It's part of a deal to surrender southern areas to the Syrian government. So back to Sami Hamdi once again. What does this say about, A, the level of coordination between the pro-Assad forces on the ground there, Iranians, the Russians, if there's this sort of green light from the Russians to go ahead and then Iranian militias step in?
I think the problem with the way we've talked about Syria in the past is that we've oversimplified it in the sense that we've said there's Iran, there's Russia, there's Syria, and even I've been at fault at that. However, when we talk about the ratio, for example, between Russia and Assad, it is not entirely one orders the other. There is unilateral action that is taken by Assad. With regards to Iran and its militias in Syria, some of these militias have in the past taken unilateral actions. So, for example, in areas where we've seen demographic changes or agreements to switch populations, whether it's Shia population for a Sunni population, we've seen militias go outside of the fold of Iran's orders and, for example, detonate a bus with a load of refugees. I think in this particular case, this is a militia which acted outside of orders. When Tehran heard the news and Moscow heard the news, they got together, they discussed with each other, they reissued the orders, maybe even threatened that militia that they had to abide by the conditions for the transfer of some of these particular refugees. So I think in this particular case, this is a militia that stepped out of bounds, and Russia had to send in its own police in order to restore some sort of order. But as you said, it shows that the coordination is not as strong as everybody thinks. And even if the Syria conflict ends with a semi-Assad victory, this doesn't suggest that they're all going to be friends after the Syria war finishes. There may very well be, and I do think this will happen, that Assad may fall out with Moscow and with Tehran. Tehran will fall out with Moscow, and we may genuinely see a new phase of this particular conflict that sees Syria become a battle of proxies.
If it's not already that, in the opinion of some. Thanks so much, Sami Hamdi there.